Bible tells you how to go to heaven, not how the heavens go.
Neil deGrasse Tyson just dropped a bombshell that completely changes how you see religion. And the craziest part, the more you understand the universe, the less certain you become that someone is watching over it. But that's where it gets really interesting. Because this isn't just a wild idea, it's something the data actually supports. Just listen to this.
93% of elite scientists reject God.
This data is kinda weird because, of course, if you walk down any street in America and ask people a simple question, do you believe in a God that listens to your prayers? About 90% will say yes. So you might be asking yourself what happened when they turned to science. Well, the first thing you should understand is these people's answer is not because they go to church every Sunday, not because they follow every religious rule, but because deep down they feel like there's something out there, paying attention. And that's important, because that one question cuts through everything. It doesn't ask about tradition or culture or habit. It asks about belief, real belief. Now here's where things start to shift. Take that same question and ask people who didn't just go to school, but went further. People who didn't just memorize facts, but were trained to question them. People with master's degrees, doctorates, people whose entire job is to challenge what we think we know. That number drops. Not a little. Significantly. It falls to around 60%. And you might think, okay, that makes sense. Education changes how people see the world. But wait, we're just getting started. Now take it a step further. Ask scientists. Not just any scientists, biologists, physicists, engineers, mathematicians. People who spend their lives studying the laws of reality itself. People who don't just believe things, they test them. Now the number drops again. Down to 40%. But here's the thing most people miss. That drop, it's not as dramatic as it looks. Because every scientist already has an advanced degree. So really, the shift isn't from 90% to 40%. It's from 60% to 40%. Which means becoming a scientist doesn't change belief as much as you'd think. It's not science alone doing this. It's something deeper. It's the habit of questioning. And that's where everything begins to unravel. Because when you take that same question and ask not just scientists, but the most accomplished scientists on Earth, members of elite scientific academies, the people at the very edge of human knowledge, the number doesn't just drop. It collapses, down to 7%. Let that sink in for a second. 90% becomes 7. Now most people look at that and think, that's the story. Wow, 93% of elite scientists reject belief in God. But that's not the interesting part. Not even close. The real question is this. Who are the 7%? Because think about it. These are the people who understand the universe better than anyone alive. They've spent decades exploring reality at its deepest levels, from the tiniest particles to the largest galaxies. And yet some of them still pray, still believe, still hold onto something beyond the equations. And that is where things get complicated. Because if knowledge alone erased belief, that number would be 0. But it's not. So something else is happening here. And we don't fully understand what. But here's where it gets uncomfortable. If you're trying to argue against belief, if you're trying to convince people that science replaces religion, why start with the general public? Why not start with that 7%? Because if you can't convince the people who already understand the universe at the highest level, what chance do you have with everyone else? Think about that. But that's just one layer of the story. Because if you go even further, into a field that doesn't just study the universe, but studies thinking itself, philosophy, that number doesn't just drop. It disappears. Among philosophers, true philosophers, not theologians, the belief in a personal God is almost non-existent. We're talking less than 1%, essentially 0. And that tells you something powerful. Because philosophers don't rely on experiments, they rely on logic, on reasoning, on breaking ideas down to their core. And when they do, Belief struggles to survive. Now you might be thinking, okay, this is all just numbers, statistics, abstract ideas. But here's where it becomes real. Because belief doesn't just sit quietly in people's minds. It shapes the world around us, sometimes in ways we don't even notice. Take something as simple as a classroom, a place where young minds are supposed to learn about the world, to explore ideas, to question, to grow. Now imagine a teacher standing in front of that classroom, and instead of encouraging curiosity, they say this: if you don't accept a specific religious belief, you're going to hell. And it doesn't stop there. They tell students that evolution, the foundation of modern biology, is just a theory you can ignore. That the Big Bang, the origin of the universe, is optional. That dinosaurs somehow existed alongside humans. Now pause for a second, because this isn't about religion anymore. This is about something else entirely. This is about confusing belief with knowledge. And that's a dangerous line to blur. Because you can believe whatever you want about the universe, but the universe doesn't care what you believe. If humans and dinosaurs lived at the same time, we would have evidence. But we don't. And every scientist, yes, even the 40% who still believe in God, knows that. So this isn't a battle between science and religion. It's a battle between understanding and misunderstanding. And that distinction matters more than anything. Because once you lose the ability to tell the difference, you don't just lose knowledge, you lose progress. And that's where things start to scale up. Because this isn't just about classrooms. It's not just about individuals. It's about entire civilizations. Let's zoom out for a moment. 1,000 years ago, the center of scientific discovery wasn't in Europe. It wasn't in America. It was in the Islamic world. In places like Baghdad, where mathematics, astronomy, medicine, and engineering were advancing at a pace the rest of the world couldn't match. Algebra was born there. Algorithms, yes, the very word comes from Arabic. Even the numbers we use today are called Arabic numerals. Think about that. At a time when parts of Europe were burning people for questioning authority, another part of the world was unlocking the secrets of the universe. So what changed? How does a civilization go from leading scientific discovery to barely participating in it? Because today, out of over 1 billion people, the contribution to the scientific frontier is almost invisible. And that's not an attack. That's a question, a serious one. Because when you look at global scientific achievements, like Nobel Prizes, the imbalance is staggering. A small population, just millions, producing a massive portion of discoveries, while a much larger population contributes almost none. And that raises a deeper question. Not about intelligence, not about capability, but about conditions. What kind of environment allows curiosity to thrive? And what kind of environment shuts it down? Because history shows us something very clear. When questioning is encouraged, discovery explodes. But when questioning is replaced with certainty, something else happens. Curiosity begins to fade. And once that happens, you don't just stop learning. You stop asking. And when you stop asking, you might never realize just how much of the universe you're missing. Because right now, at this very moment, there are secrets about reality waiting to be discovered. Answers to questions we haven't even thought to ask yet. Breakthroughs that could change everything we know about existence. But here's the uncomfortable part. What if those discoveries are being delayed? Not because we lack intelligence, not because we lack technology, but because in some parts of the world, and even in parts of our own thinking, we've replaced curiosity with certainty. And if that's true, then the cost isn't just philosophical, it's cosmic. Because every unanswered question, every unexplored idea, every mind that never gets the chance to question, is a piece of the universe that remains forever hidden. And the real question is, How many of those pieces have we already lost without even realizing it? Because the moment you decide you already have the answer, you stop looking for it. And that might be the most dangerous thing of all. But here's the thing. Humans don't just seek answers, we need them. We crave certainty. We want to feel like the universe makes sense, like there's a plan, a structure, something guiding it all. And in many ways, that's understandable. Because when you look up at the night sky, when you see thousands of stars scattered across the darkness, it feels like it must mean something. It feels intentional, personal, almost designed. But what if that feeling is misleading? What if the universe isn't built around us at all? What if we're just part of it? Because when you zoom out, really zoom out, you begin to see something unsettling. The universe is vast beyond comprehension. Hundreds of billions of galaxies, each with hundreds of billions of stars. And around many of those stars, planets, worlds, possibilities. Now ask yourself this. In a universe that large, does it make sense that everything revolves around us? Or is it more likely that we've simply placed ourselves at the center of a story we don't fully understand? And that's where science does something religion often doesn't. It removes us from the center, not out of cruelty, but out of honesty. Because the Earth isn't the center of the solar system. The solar system isn't the center of the galaxy. And the galaxy isn't the center of the universe. There is no center. And that realization changes everything. Because once you accept that you're not the focal point of existence, you start asking different questions, better questions. Instead of, why was this made for us? You begin asking, how does this actually work? And that shift from purpose to process is where discovery begins. But here's where it gets uncomfortable again. Because not everyone wants that shift. Some people prefer certainty over curiosity. Because certainty is safe. It gives you answers. It tells you what to believe, what to think, how to interpret the world. Curiosity, on the other hand, it's unsettling. It raises more questions than it answers. It forces you to admit you don't know. And for many people, that's not easy. But here's the paradox. The people who are most comfortable saying, I don't know, are often the ones who end up discovering the most. Because they keep looking. They keep questioning. They don't stop at the first explanation that feels right. And that's exactly what separates belief from understanding. Now think back to those elite scientists, the ones at the frontier of human knowledge, the ones who have dedicated their lives to uncovering the laws of the universe. 93% of them don't believe in a personal God, not because they're trying to reject meaning, but because the deeper they go, the more the universe reveals itself as something governed by laws, not intentions, patterns, not preferences. And yet, 7% still believe. And that's important, because it reminds us that humans are complex. We're not just logical machines. We're emotional, psychological, meaning-seeking beings. We don't just want to understand the universe. We want to feel connected to it. And sometimes, belief fills that gap. But here's the critical distinction. There's a difference between using belief to find comfort and using belief to define reality. Because when belief starts overriding evidence, that's when problems begin. Not just intellectually, but societally. Because history has shown us what happens when certainty replaces curiosity. Ideas stop evolving, knowledge stops expanding, and progress slows down. Or worse, stops entirely. And we've seen this before. Civilizations that once led the world in discovery, falling behind, not because they lost intelligence, but because they lost the willingness to question. Because when questioning becomes dangerous, or discouraged, or even unnecessary, innovation disappears. And when innovation disappears, so does the future. Now let's bring this back to something more immediate, more human. Moments of crisis, Moments when the world feels uncertain, chaotic, overwhelming. Because that's when belief tends to rise the strongest. After tragedy, after fear, after events that shake us to our core, we search for meaning. We look for something to hold on to, something to explain what just happened, something to make sense of the senseless. And that's completely human. But here's the question we have to ask ourselves. Are we searching for truth? Or are we searching for comfort? Because those two things are not always the same. And sometimes, they lead us in very different directions. Take a moment of global tragedy. A moment where thousands of lives are lost. Where the world stops and asks why. Now imagine a leader standing up, trying to unite people, to make sense of it all. And in doing so, framing the event in terms of belief. Our God versus theirs. But here's the problem. The universe doesn't divide itself that way. The stars don't care what language you speak. They don't care what name you give to a higher power. And in fact, many of the very stars we look at have names that come from cultures we might consider other. Think about that. For centuries, different civilizations studied the same sky, mapped the same stars, asked the same questions, and in doing so, they contributed to the same body of knowledge. Because science doesn't belong to one group. It belongs to everyone. It's universal, just like the laws it studies. And that's what makes it so powerful. It doesn't require belief. It requires evidence. It doesn't ask you to accept. It asks you to test. And that difference is everything. Because when you build your understanding of the world on evidence, it can grow, it can evolve, it can improve. But when you build it on certainty, it becomes fixed, rigid, unchanging, and in a universe that is constantly changing. That's a problem, because reality doesn't stay still. New discoveries are made. Old ideas are challenged. And what we thought we knew yesterday might not hold up tomorrow. So if your worldview can't adapt, eventually, it breaks. And that brings us back to the biggest question of all. What kind of future do we want? One where we already have all the answers? Or one where we're still willing to ask the questions? Because the truth is, we're still at the beginning. We've only scratched the surface of what there is to know. There are mysteries out there about dark matter, dark energy, the origins of the universe, the nature of consciousness itself. Questions that don't have answers yet. But they could, if we keep looking, if we keep questioning, if we resist the urge to settle for explanations that feel good, instead of ones that are true. Because the universe doesn't owe us comfort. It offers us something better. Discovery, wonder, understanding, and maybe that's enough. Or maybe it's more than enough. Because at the end of the day, being part of a universe we're still learning about might be far more extraordinary than believing we already have it all figured out. So the next time you look up at the night sky, don't just ask what it means. Ask how it works. Ask why it exists. Ask what we don't know yet. Because somewhere out there, in the vastness of space, there are answers waiting. Not for those who already believe they've found them, but for those who are still willing to search.